as the advocacy partner here locally for our Bloomington South Metro and of course across the whole metro, as we're the voice for business and the true advocacy partner, it really did lend itself to this topic today, because when you think about geographically the Bloomington Chamber and the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, you know, all along that 35W corridor, that's where a lot of commerce is being done and a lot of connectivity between our unifying groups. And so, you know, segueing into this, we're going to hear a lot about the statistics of the 35W 494 corridor, but I just think that it was so important to bring in the experts that know about this, because once again, as I mentioned last month, you know, Bloomington is a very passionate and involved community. And we want to make sure that we get the right information in your hands as residents, as employers, as employees, as commuters, right? We want to make sure that you guys have the most timely and accurate, up-to-date information. So I brought in the experts. I have Karl Keel, who's been with the city of Bloomington for 11 years. He's the Public Works Director, and he has been there since 2007. He has over 30 years of industry experience. I know he was also in Roseville, and he's worked with MnDOT, and so other metro cities, and so a large engineering consulting firm, graduate of the University of Minnesota, yay, with a degree in civil engineering and architecture. Karl and his wife Mary, they currently live in Roseville. We've already exchanged some information because that's where our daughter graduated from high school. And let's see, a very spoiled Labrador Retriever. This year, at least for the time being, they will be becoming empty nesters. So if anybody needs if you need a support group, there might be some folks in this room that probably could give you some tips. Then we've got Katy Sen. Katy is our lobbyist from Messerli Kramer in their government relations department. Katy she's also the lobbyist for the city of Bloomington. How long have you been doing that?
This is my third session.
Okay, third session. And so she brings a decade of legislative and executive branch experience to the areas of tax policy, bonding, transportation, which is really, really important and near and dear to our chamber. State and local government issues. Prior to joining Messerli Kramer, Katy served as Deputy Chief of Staff for Governor Mark Dayton, where she oversaw development of the governor's biennial and capital budgets, provided strategic and policy advice, coordinated with federal representatives in Washington and on a variety of issues. Katy also served as Director of Research for the House of Representatives DFL caucus. And Katy holds a master's degree in public policy from Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government. Whoa, girl. And a BA in political science from Northwestern University. Katy lives in South Minneapolis with her husband and 2 children. And we had a slight change in life happens, right? So we had a quick switch out from commuter services, and we have Kate Meredith joining us rather than Melissa Madison. And Kate is the Director of Outreach for Commuter Services. In her role, she works with employers, and it's 5 member cities, Bloomington, Richfield, Edina, Eden Prairie, and Minnetonka, the 494 corridor, to establish commuter benefit programs that encourage employees to take sustainable ways of getting to work. She loves to see the impact of employer-supported programs, maybe some of the things that you guys are implementing at your companies, and changing commuter behaviors, thus reducing traffic congestion, air pollution for our communities. So just please welcome our panel. Very excited to have them talk about this important topic, the timing, the cost, how it's going to impact all of us, plus what we as business people can do to be involved in this process. So first of all, we're going to have Karl go ahead and do a quick PowerPoint presentation.
Well, this is a presentation that I've been giving for a number of years, or at least an abridged version of it, and hopefully it'll give a kind of a basic outline of what this project is and how it's developed over the past decade or so. So this is a aerial photograph of when the interchange was constructed in 1959, and you could note that it's a standard 4-leaf clover interchange. And you look at the quadrants, there's some development, but rather low density and some kind of undeveloped parcels. If we were to take a look at this today, I think what's notable is that there's a heck of a lot more development all the way around it, but the interchange itself looks almost exactly the same. Originally designed, this was designed to handle about 220,000 vehicles a day. Today it carries over 500 million vehicles per day. So I think the basic point is not much has changed in the interchange itself, but the complete community all the way around it is transformed considerably. If we take a look at this interchange kind of relative to the metro area with regard to congestion, you can see that consistently this interchange is one of the highest congestion areas within the Twin Cities. It's actually ranked as the 17th worst commute in the nation. From a safety point of view, if you look at crash frequency in the metro area, likewise, it's one of the highest crash areas consistently as ranked by MnDOT. Currently is the seventh worst in our metro area. If you look at the area served by this interchange, the 494 corridor, you can see this is kind of a graph of the number of jobs that are within the 494 corridor. And you can see that they are more than downtown Minneapolis. So the point being, the interchange serves a very large economic area. Actually, about a fifth of the metro jobs are on the 494 corridor. So this interchange has been recognized as a need for improvements for many years. And kind of this is a summary of some of the things that have happened in the last decade or so. Really began with a very large study in 2001 that came up with the kind of the ultimate needs for this interchange, resulted in like 3 levels of bridges, a very expensive, large project, met all our needs, required a fair amount of right-of-way, and the trouble was it was very, very expensive. It was more than $500 million in today's dollars. And as we kind of proceeded, it was very evident that we were not going to get that type of money for this project, or it was going to be very difficult. So MnDOT went through a series of studies to kind of redesign this and to come up with a new design which was more affordable and more constructible. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Would also note that MnDOT has spent a great deal of time studying traffic congestion in and around the interchange, and particularly on 494. So there have been a number of studies that looked at min-pass lanes or small improvements that could be done on 494 to improve congestion. Another kind of important piece is that the Orange Line BRT, this is a kind of a rapid bus transit system, is being constructed along 35W, and actually plans are to construct this line on the alignment of Knox Avenue, which runs just to the west of 35W and runs through the Southtown development. And would also note that there was some significant improvements done on Penn Avenue and Lyndale Avenue, and those were all done in anticipation of this interchange. So they are constructed and designed so that they could accommodate a future interchange at 35 and 494. So this is the current design alternative, which is called a Turbine Design. It's somewhat of a less intensive construction to the 2001 EIS, and really what it does is it balances the need for high speeds and curves that are kind of freeway speeds, so that the curves on the interchange are slightly tighter than would be ideal. But it also minimizes the amount of right-of-way that's needed. And the biggest part about it is that it really doesn't require as many bridges. And then when you're talking about interchange construction, bridges are the most expensive part of that. And so if you can minimize the amount of bridges, you can kind of keep the price down. Would note that this project is still rather expensive to build. It's somewhere between $250 and $300 million. But the big benefit of this is that it can be built in phases. And the first phase, which is really a flyover ramp from northbound 35W to westbound 494, can be built on its own. And would note that the major problem with this interchange is exactly those movements, those that go from 35W to the south to 494 to the west. So the bulk of the problems at the interchange can be fixed with the first phase. And that can be constructed at still a high number, but a much more affordable number of $85 million. So for the past 5 or 6 years, we've been looking for $85 million to build the first phase of this interchange. I think we are all familiar with the conversation going on about overall transportation funding and the difficulty in finding dollars to build these kind of constructions. But would note that currently there's a number of opportunities or things that are happening in the transportation environment that are somewhat promising. The first and probably the kind of the hottest item currently is the program that the state has called the Corridors of Commerce. This is $400 million, $200 million of which would be allocated to the metro area for projects like this. And so actually just past Monday, MnDOT had a deadline for submitting projects. We have submitted this project and various versions of this project. We hope to hear probably by about April if this project will receive some funding. Would note that the Orange Line project, that BRT project I described, is mostly funded. It's still waiting final approval from the federal government, but that is a project that does touch the 494 interchange, and so there is some funding available in that. MnDOT has a number of projects right along 494 that it has funded, and they could use some of those dollars to help pay for this project. I noted that there was a number of studies about other smaller projects on 494 to relieve congestion, and MnDOT again is very interested in constructing those as part of the interchange if at all possible. And another large opportunity is that the 35W bridge across the Minnesota River is going to be reconstructed. That project was originally programmed for the year 2020 by MnDOT, so they had bonding capacity set aside in their program to build that bridge in the year 2020. They have found alternative funding, and they're actually accelerating that project to 2018. They're going to be doing that project this summer and next summer. And the benefit of that is that it leaves a funding opportunity in the year 2020. And so that's again, something that's playing into the conversation. And thanks to folks like you and to many other people in the community, this project has long received a great deal of support from the community. And so I think it's very much on the radar of MnDOT and the governor's office. And so I think we're kind of cautiously optimistic, or at least this is a time in history where I think we have our best chance of funding of this project. So that's just a basic overview of the project, and I think we can start our conversation.
Thank you, Karl. If you want to have a seat, and Katy and Kate, come on down. You know, I was sitting thinking, we were meeting yesterday, our public policy chair and our new government relations staff person with the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, and we were talking specifically about where we're going to be focusing our advocacy work and our public policy attention, and transportation. We had a long and lengthy conversation about that because transit and transportation is so vital to the Chamber of Commerce, but mostly it's so important to our member businesses. We've got to make sure that that they get their staff members to their business, in an easy in and out fashion. Their customers need to make sure that they can get to their place of business, as well as just people coming in from other parts of the metro, coming into this very popular corridor where we know there's just so much commerce being done right here in Bloomington. So thank you guys for engaging in this conversation with us. And I just want to start out with, give us a little bit of history from each of your points of view. I know Karl gave a little bit of history, but about the conversations that you've had about this construction project, really from the perspective of the city and from the perspective of businesses and commuters, if you don't mind. And we've got a couple of mics here.
So again, I think I kind of outlined the kind of, how important this is from a transportation network point of view and for the economic development within this corridor. From the city's point of view specifically, we have a number of issues that occur when there's congestion on 494. Probably the largest are those economic benefit issues. Would note that about 80% of our development that we project into the next 30 years is along the 494 corridor. And this interchange in particular and capacity on 494 are really key to serving that. Kind of a more quality of life issue is that whenever there's congestion on the freeway, you can right away see the transfer of traffic from the freeway onto our local roadway system. So American Boulevard and even streets as far south as 106th Street see huge increases in traffic volumes and are really a nuisance and an impediment to the neighborhood when that happens.
I'd just add a little bit maybe more from the advocacy side, what's happened in the last few years, because I think a lot of people in this room have actually been key to the fact that we are in the position we're in now, Karl being one of them. I think Karl's presentation is a little modest in the sense that it implies, you just kind of do these different items and then you end up getting $300 million from MnDOT at the end, and it's a lot more difficult than that. And Karl and Glenn Markegard from the city have worked really hard with MnDOT and have good relationships with and have been in touch with staff and really doing a lot of problem solving around how you could get, if you can't get up to 300, how can you kind of get as many pieces of the project as you can and what's workable, and that shows when you turn in an application to MnDOT with a request. I'd also say in the last few years, our legislative delegation has been pushing really hard and talking about this interchange. I think everyone in Bloomington and the legislative delegation has been working on this for a long time, but the last few years we've had some press attention. There have been stories on Channel 5, basically every time this bill's come up for a hearing, we've had a story on Channel 5. Tina Smith, when she was Lieutenant Governor, came and did a press conference at the interchange and talked about transportation funding and kind of the fact that they highlighted that as an example project, I think within MnDOT helped raise the profile of that project and the need for it. And the Bloomington Chamber helped organize resolutions from all the surrounding chambers in support of the interchange a few years ago, which also is helpful, I think, just to show that business community support. And just this past week, our legislative delegation from 494 Corridor Commission, which is all 5 cities, legislators signed on. So I know Representative Slocum's here and Representative Carlson and Senator Wickland.
Yeah, and Representative Carlson just came in as well.
So they all helped coordinate that letter and sign on to that letter to Commissioner Zelli. So there's been a lot of pieces of, I think, just raising the profile of the project and making people understand why it's regional and statewide significance in the last few years has really helped us kind of be where the position that we're in, hoping that we will get chosen for this Corridors of Commerce money. There's obviously a lot of great projects, and so you don't want to feel overly optimistic because it's such a large amount of money as far as projects go, but I do feel like we're really well positioned, and it's because of a lot of the work that people in this room have done the last few years. It really does make a difference.
Thanks, Katie. So just the perspective of the I-494 Corridor Commission, the interchange reconstruction and the accelerating funding of widening 494 from Bloomington up through Minnetonka really spurred the formation of the 494 Corridor Commission in the mid-'80s. The organization works to address traffic congestion in the 494 area and together also to influence MnDOT to prioritize road and construction improvements. The chair of the 494 Corridor Commission, currently it is Brad Aho, a council member from the city of Eden Prairie, has testified several times at the Capitol for improvements to both 35W 494 and the Orange Line, as well as improvements on I-494. At the legislature and with meetings with MnDOT, the Corridor Commission states our desire to see the major construction for the interchange and the Orange Line occur concurrently, as both projects will take about 2 years, and the public just doesn't have an appetite for a 4-year plus major disruption in that area. So they're really hoping that both can be reconstructed concurrently.
Okay, thank you. I think that's an interesting piece. I want to understand, tell us, and maybe this is just, maybe everybody gets it, but tell us why northbound 35 to westbound 494 is that first focus of the first phase.
Again, I think it's pretty simple if you look at the traffic volumes at that interchange. really what the kind of the predominant movement is for people from the South Metro to trying work their way over towards the 494 corridor, as well as the Golden Triangle area in Eden Prairie, and even areas a little bit west of there. So just traffic volume wise, that is where people want to go.
Okay. And so the other picture, this picture. So tell us, if you can point a little bit, Karl, to some of the nuances that eventually will take place, and then how does this affect Nicollet and the other entrances over here to the east? Can you do that for us?
Sure. So I mean, the first phase of this is this movement that runs northbound. We go over a fly ramp that goes underneath 494 and then up over 35W to make it to westbound 494. Kind of a nuance of that is that you can see you would not be able to get off at Penn Avenue. Penn Avenue is too close to the interchange for that movement to work. That was one of the kind of compromises that is made by this design. The original design in 2001 would allow that movement to happen, but it came at a cost. Many more structures would need to do that. So that was one of the kind of the compromises of this design. So again, the other point of this is that many of these ramps, while they're kind of wide and sweeping, they're slightly tighter than MnDOT and the FHWA would like to see. So again, another compromise is that the speed that you can travel on these is slightly less than you would typically have in a brand new interchange. Again, the big benefit of it is you can see that it's for the most part contained within the existing right-of-way, which reduces the cost considerably.
Great. How about do further phases then affect the entrance to 494 here to the east with our roads going north and south here?
So again, I think on the east side, there is a detail that has to be worked out yet about access at Lyndale. I believe the current design does allow for full access at Lyndale, so that will be maintained. So for the most part, with the exception of the reduction of access at Penn Avenue, it has the same access points that exist today.
Okay, great. And you guys, certainly if you've got some more questions on this at the end, we can pull this back up. Thanks, Karl. Anybody else have anything else that they want to add to just the entry points or the construction itself? All right. Talk to us a little bit more about the money. Talk to us about, we've seen some dollar figures out here today in the $85 million for phase one. Talk about deadlines for using that money. Of course, there's a lot of information out here in the community. We're very passionate here in Bloomington, and we want to gather as much information as possible. And so, in meetings I've been in, we've talked about when that money needs to be used. If indeed it needs to be used by a certain time. How we fit into the decision making that is going to be done to use that money. Can you guys address that?
I can talk a little bit, and then you can add on to it. So what the money that we're kind of going after right now, the corridors of commerce money, as Karl mentioned, there was $400 million allocated in last year's transportation bill, which is a very large pot of corridors of commerce money historically. And so it's unusual to kind of have that amount out there. It's split half and half between greater Minnesota and the metro area. And so what Bloomington has done, and Karl can talk more about it, they've kind of submitted a variety of different pieces and ways that you could kind of pull together parts of the 494 interchange. So the $85 million is the phase one piece, but there's other items that we know MnDOT wants to do and needs to do and has some other funding streams to do, potentially some min-pass lanes. Met Council has been really supportive of min-pass lanes, and I think has included some of these pieces in a letter in their support of corridors of commerce. So it's a little bit of piecing together those projects and figuring out, letting MnDOT have enough flexibility to decide how much they can allocate for this project and how that would piece together. So it's different than like a bonding, like you might be thinking of the transit station at the Mall of America, which we also got funding for last year, and that's slightly different in that it's really a partnership between the several entities. This is a partnership, but it's MnDOT, well, it will be MnDOT led. So it's not so much that you worry that if we're chosen that it doesn't get done. I mean, essentially at least that's not something I have a concern about. I think if MnDOT picks us for corridors of commerce, I mean, it's a trunk highway, so MnDOT will be the one kind of doing the work and going forward. So that's why it's been really important for us to work closely with them and kind of know what their needs are along the corridor, what their preferences are, so that we can coordinate and be better positioned to get that money, which it's extremely competitive. I mean, if you think about it, $200 million for the whole metro area, to do this whole interchange would be $3 million. So even just to do this entire one interchange is more than the entire pot of corridors of commerce money that they have. And so transportation funding is still, there's still a lot of need there. So, Karl, you want to add?
So again, I would note that this project is not funded, and so there is not a definite timeline for it. It would take a minimum of 2 years to construct, and it's all likelihood that a project like this would be constructed as a design-build contract, which means that a contractor would be hired that has a team of engineers and others, so they would actually design the project rather quickly, or even as construction begins, they would finish the design. So kind of timeline-wise, this is probably a minimum of 2 years to have out. So that's if we get funding now. So
When would it start?
it would, I mean, again, if we
If
had
we get funding now.
If we got funding now, it would likely have a design-build contract probably in 2019 would be the earliest. And the bulk of the construction would then be 2020 at the earliest, or 2021 would be the earliest. And as Katy noted, this would likely be a combination of different funding sources. And as I noted, there's a number of kind of funding opportunities that are here. Katy noted that there are a number of projects that MnDOT has been considering along 494. They have some already programmed ones. They have some mill and overlay projects that they could use those dollars to help with this project. They have a number of smaller projects. These are kind of either min-pass lanes, which are kind of the toll lanes for transit and for multi-occupant vehicles. But also they've identified a number of small auxiliary lanes that could do a great deal for congestion. I think any of you that drive that regularly know that in the evening we see a huge backup, especially from France Avenue to the 35, and that's because there's a lane that's lost at France Avenue. So they have one of these kind of smaller, and I say smaller, it's still about $12 million, is to construct a expanded lane from France to 35W. So these smaller projects.
That would be great.
Yes. So
Right?
these are small auxiliary projects. Again, small being still rather large, but they would have a huge benefit. So in our application, we actually submitted 7 different projects for corridors of commerce. They're just different combinations of this project and those auxiliary lane projects. We don't know exactly what kind of project is going to be most competitive in this program or what the maximum size might be. So we submitted a whole variety of them so that if they're looking for a small project, we have one of those. If they're looking for a larger project, we have one of those. So there's, for instance, one of the projects is that France to 35 auxiliary lane and phase 1 of this project. Also a different one is just phase 1 of this project. We also have just the auxiliary lane as a project. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how the scoring turns out for this, but hopefully we have a project for just about every scenario, I hope.
I like that. That's a great approach. And in terms of our legislative delegates that are here, can we talk at all about timing of the decision? Is this something, once again, that's going to be manifested during session, yes or no? Are we looking for timing sometime after that?
So the corridors of commerce decisions are anticipated in April, so that would be during the legislative session. The process that's been happening, which Bloomington, as well as the 494 Corridor Commission and some other city groups weighed in on, has been happening over the fall and winter. So MnDOT first had to come up with criteria, including what the regional distribution was going to be. So the 50-50 distribution came out of kind of a comment period. There was also a criteria related to economic impact, which both 494 Corridor Commission and Bloomington weighed in on. And MnDOT struggles, understandably, with how to measure economic impact of projects. And so because they felt like that wasn't their expertise, they actually had initially proposed to have fewer points allocated for projects that had a bigger economic impact. And I think a lot of cities, especially a city like Bloomington, where this project has a huge economic impact, we really wanted to make sure those points were allocated and recognized for projects. And so in the end, MnDOT did bump up the points that were allotted for economic impact. So they've gone through a whole process of kind of developing criteria, getting input. And as Karl mentioned, the application deadline has now passed, and they will be reviewing all the projects between now and April. So, that we're just trying to do it's hard to know exactly what they're looking for and exactly which contacts make a difference. So we're just kind of trying everything. Press, legislators have been helping, chamber input, all of those things can make a difference kind of between now and April. So that's when we're hoping to
It does take a
find.
village.
Yeah.
It really does. Do any of our legislators want to share feedback about what to expect, what your pieces are in this? Does anybody? Yes.
I'll just make a comment. I can speak loud. Karl's point about this being an opportunity time period for us, he's spot on. Maybe you want to just go back to that one slide that shows how these certain projects and funding sources are all coming together at this time. I mean, this is where that advocacy really comes into play. Sometimes repetition is good, repeating those talking points, speaking to how this impacts a very large region, not only for economic development, but just for livability as well. This is a major transit corridor as well, so hearing your voices at the Capitol. I mean, again, this is, the corridors of commerce is where a lot of our eggs are all in one basket, but, if that were to not work out with some of these other funding opportunities, this is our chance to get it done. I really do feel that this is the timing for getting this done, so we're all hopeful.
Thank you, Representative Carlson. Anyone else from the legislature want to add to that? Yes.
Yeah, I'll just add that during session, we'll be happy to be providing any more advocacy that we can, and if we find out that there is some any possibilities for legislative action, we'll take that as well. But I hope that, by the letter that we put together showing broad support of all the legislators along the corridor, that will help also indicate that, this is not just a very local issue, it's a regional issue, and we'll keep pressing that as well. So, and also I think this combining the work so that we have one time of disruption is really an important thing to keep reinforcing with people too. So,
Thank you, Senator Wicklund. We're going to feel some pain. We certainly all recognize, and maybe some of you don't, but 35W, which I've referenced several times, 35 going into downtown. That corridor is going to be greatly affected by a project that's starting now. Thank you. And do you want to just update everybody a little bit on that piece, if people aren't familiar with it?
It's a complicated project. It's happening now, especially after the Super Bowl. They're really ramping up. It's a lot of work, and it's going to be a 4-year project. So it's bridges, it's just do you know more about
Going into
there are 5
downtown
stages.
Minneapolis.
Yeah. So if you could maybe.
Well, I think what Kate is referring to is what's called the Lake Street Interchange Project and the Braid Bridges, the large project that's happening just south of downtown. And again, they will be constructing that under traffic, but that they will be restricting traffic quite a bit at certain phases. So it's been rather quiet this past year. They're doing the work on Franklin Avenue currently, and there wasn't a terrible amount of disruption. They promise that disruption is going to get much worse next summer.
Yes, the entry points to downtown. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to add? Is it anyone going into downtown often? I know I do. And so I know this is something that we'll learn a lot more about. I just want to shift a little bit now to talk about the Orange Line and how that fits in, because obviously transportation very important to our member businesses, as well as transit options for our commuters, for our residents, for our staff coming in and out of our area. I think having a north-south transit lane with the buses is going to be, vitally important, especially, in the future when we want to get more people working down in this area who might be choosing to live closer to downtown or actually in downtown. Having them commute out here is important. I know Mark from the Nerdery, we've talked about this. Your employees here, many of them may or may not live right here in Bloomington. Most of them, I believe, live, in the urban core, and so having a transit option for them, I think, other than bikes, bicycle is going to be really important. Can you talk, I'll put the slide over, can we talk about the Orange Line? And then I know we have Ken Vinge here, who is our chamber, he is our chamber president, chair, and he works with Kraus Anderson and very closely with Southtown. So if we could have a conversation about the Orange Line, how that fits into this whole picture.
So the Orange Line is, again, part of the transit system in the metro area, and that is really a bus rapid transit that runs roughly along 35W from downtown. First phase of it will go to Burnsville, and then eventually be extended to Lakeville. That plan has received all its state funding, and it's received a number of the preliminary approvals from the federal government for its funding, and it's awaiting its last funding hurdle at the federal government, which I think people are fairly optimistic will come through at some point here. In this immediate area, what that involves is a new station at American Boulevard, and the way that works is the bus will travel.
Can you show everybody where that is, please?
Yes. So the way that this station will work is that if you're coming southbound on 35W, get off on 76th Street, and then go over by the Best Buy, Knox Avenue, which is just to the east of the Best Buy building. There would be a station on the north side, and then there will be a tunnel underneath 494, just immediately to the east or to the west of the interchange itself. And then it would pop up then on the Kraus Anderson site at Southtown, and then run through this site. There's an alignment that roughly runs in this direction, and another station will be here and here. And then you would get back on the freeway on 82nd Street, down quite a little bit off. I'm sorry, right here. You get off here. I'm sorry, this is American Boulevard. 82nd Street is here. So again, that project is funded for the most part. Just has one last funding hurdle, and they could start constructing that once that federal funding comes in. So again, the construction of that underpass is kind of the main point that impacts this interchange. Ideally, you'd construct those two pieces at the same time. It's possible to do them separately, but then you have kind of double the impact to the traveling public, and there's some extra cost associated with building them separately.
Okay, so we may hear about that dovetailing the interchange project phase 1 sometime in the early summer.
Yeah, I was also just going to say, I know Jenna works here from Met Council, and she may have more insight into they're
Snuck
tracking
in,
the
I didn't
federal
see you.
funding very closely. So I don't know if you have it. That was a good description from Karl, but she may have more to add.
Yeah.
Have any kind of update. I checked in with some of our MTS, Metropolitan Transportation Services folks that just said we were just waiting on the federal money, so I don't have an update on any timelines or anything. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Thank you. Ken, do you have anything that you want to add in terms of how you're looking at this from Southtown's perspective?
Thanks, Kim. Yes, the Orange Line will be coming through, well, if funded and built, it will be coming through Southtown. And one of our biggest concerns initially was that it would dissect part of our property because we have the Lucky 13 pad and Southtown Center, and it was going to have to ramp down to get under 494. It was going to drop 16 feet or so. And so we worked hard with Metro Transit over the past number of years. And so the alternative that they've come up with, and is the only one on the table right now, is to literally go around Lucky 13 and then go under 494. So that was a great compromise to help us retain value for our shopping center and still get the project done and keep the timing that they needed for the bus rapid transit. One of the things, obviously, with Southtown, we're very concerned about, the impacts of all this different stuff going on. And if you look at that plan, if you look at Coles there on the far left, the on-ramp to 35W almost goes through their loading dock. So there's a lot of things that we're trying to keep updated on. And so listening to this program, there was just a couple of questions. We did meet with MnDOT about 2 weeks ago. And where I guess I got confused is the corridors of commerce. And as we were discussing it, and it was more with the engineers, so maybe a little different take on it than with some of the others. But when he was talking about that, he was talking more about a route work from 169 all the way to the river, and adding the car pass lanes and so forth, carpool lanes. And he said that the way I understood it was that project was going to be about $400 million. And then, of course, with the 494-35W intersection, then that would be another, $300 million if you got the full project. So am I reading those numbers wrong?
Well, I can talk about the interchange, and I'll let Karl expand too. But so we are not optimistic that we would get the full project this year from Corridors of Commerce. The goal is really try to get that phase one. So that 85 million that Karl talked about, just the the movement from south to west. And so that 85 million number could grow if you packaged in some things like an auxiliary lane, and that number could be higher. And so that's kind of what Karl was talking about, having different levels. Because there's only 200 million allocated for the entire metro, we're not, I don't see any scenario where we get the full amount through Corridors of Commerce. When we kind of set out on I think 2 years ago, we really decided, all the entities in this room, the chamber was the leader, and 494 and the city of Bloomington said, what do we need from an advocacy standpoint to move the project kind of from just, everyone knows it needs to get done, but it's not on any lists. And the goal, it really is gonna have to be a MnDOT decision, either through Corridors of Commerce or through general transportation funding. And right now, MnDOT's general transportation funding program is so underfunded that by 2023, they're not doing any more mobility projects, which is what they call congestion relief. So this is a mobility project in MnDOT's mind. It's not a mill and overlay. It's not repairing a bridge that's gonna fall down. So without more investment in the transportation system as a whole, the mobility projects are gonna completely go away by 2023. And so this is one opportunity, and there aren't a lot of them, frankly, for a project of this size to get that second phase, but getting the first phase would be a huge deal because of the limited kind of transportation funding for these types of projects. And I'm not sure about the 169 project. I don't know if you know about that one.
I think what Ken is referring to is a project that, as I noted, there's been a number of studies that have looked at a variety of different projects along 494, and kind of basically they include our interchange project. They include a study that looks at these auxiliary lanes, like the short one I talked about from France to 35W. And there's also a larger study that looks at a min-pass lane. This is that high occupancy vehicle transit lane that would be tolled for non-high occupancy vehicles, that runs basically the whole length of 494. I'm not exactly sure how far. I think it goes up to Plymouth, frankly, on the west side, and then runs all the way to the freeway. I believe that's the $400 million project you were referring to. That is a project that I believe the Met Council has submitted to the Corridors of Commerce program for consideration. And again, we'll see how that fares. So there's a whole kind of a buffet of projects along there, and I think the trick here is to pick the ones that kind of fit into the available funding.
Great. One more question that I want to do because I can, and then we'll open it up to question and answers. But we've got a chamber member, and I don't believe anyone from GN Resound is here today, but we've got a chamber member that sits right here. Have you been in conversations with them about how this looks like it's encroaching pretty close to their building, how that's going to impact them?
I believe that they were involved in the study in 2014 that kind of came up with this conceptual plan. And as I understand how that will work is that lane is actually where the frontage road currently exists. So it's not actually taking their property, but it would take some access that they have currently.
Okay.
Would note that this design is kind of what would be called a conceptual design. and that the next step in the design process is actually to get to details, and so there may be some changes to this. So this,
Okay.
I wouldn't want to say, don't look at this and think this is exactly how it will be built. This is conceptually how it would be built. As it moves through the design process, there would be much more, many more details developed.
Okay, yeah, I know that they have a very robust operation there that is relatively sensitive with the types of building that they do for hearing aid manufacturing, and so it's just, so I was just curious. Great, let's open it up to Q&A, and then hopefully we can have some questions directed to Kate in terms of how your business can work very closely with them to help your commuters, to help your staff. And I'm going to have Mark Malmberg from the Nerdery. Thank you again, Mark. He has been a fantastic partner on these. He can walk around with a microphone.
Yeah. As you mentioned, you know, as commuters, this conversation is right up our rather congested alley, so I'm glad that we could have it here with you guys. And you know, when your company has a nerdatorium, it's almost your civic duty to share it with the community. So thanks for coming, and I'll share the mic now.
I'm curious, if phase 1 gets funded, what's the comfort level that the subsequent phases will follow suit readily?
I mean, my comfort level would be rather low. I think I expect that if we got phase 1, it would relieve a lot of the political pressure. That would be quite a win to get phase 1. I don't think we would actually see full funding. I'd be surprised if we saw that, you know, even in the foreseeable future past that, frankly. Would note, and Katy kind of mentioned this, that the larger funding kind of scenario in the state and in the nation is that a lot of these projects are funded primarily from gas taxes. And if you look at the power of the gas tax, the federal gas tax is what, I think it's 18.5 cents per gallon currently. That hasn't changed since 1993. The state gas tax is 28.5 cents. Did change in 2013. But if you were to look at the buying power of that funding source, that's essentially about half as strong as it was in 1993 when the federal gas tax was last increased. So the amount of money, kind of the buying power of our funding sources is going down. At the same time, we're getting much more fuel-efficient vehicles, and so the amount of money collected from the gas tax is really kind of staying stable. So the challenge that MnDOT looks at is they're looking at their program over the next 20 years. The large portion of their program currently is dedicated towards preservation projects. That's just keeping the pavements and the potholes and the bridges from falling down. And if you look, currently, that's about half of its program is spent on preservation projects. By 2023, that's of their available funds for projects, that's probably about 90%. So really, her comment that really all we're going to be doing are preservation projects, that is very true. And this type of project is not considered a preservation project. This is considered a mobility or a congestion relief project. So the available fundings are small for those 10 projects.
I do, thank you. So what frustrates me on all this, and I know that Karl and Glenn have heard my rant about this before, but what frustrates me about this is that the 17th most congested interchange in the country, that affects a quarter of the workforce in the Twin Cities, that affects cities all the way down to Elko, New Market, and east-west as far as you can look, has somehow become a local project. That it takes the Bloomington Chamber leadership, the Bloomington delegation leadership, the city of Bloomington, somehow we have to take the lead on all of this and make this what is truly a regional and a statewide project, but it takes the local leadership to make this work. And it really frustrates me because I look at, for example, the rebuild of the Crosstown. That wasn't a Richfield project. That was a Twin Cities, a regional project. And you can, the rebuild of the Burnsville Bridge is not a Burnsville project. That affects the entire metro area and is treated as such. So it really frustrates me that while I think the corridors of commerce is a great idea, and I know that everybody is working hard to try and cobble all this together, the fact that MnDOT and the state in general won't just step up and say, you know what, this is something we've got to get done for the future of the region is very frustrating to me. The legislators in this room, I know the Met Council representatives in this room, I think people get it. And for that matter, I know that Commissioner Zelli gets it. but we need at the state level and at the federal level for all this talk of infrastructure, we need to put our money where our mouths are and really get stuff like this done, because this isn't the roof of a civic center in some small town somewhere in greater Minnesota. This impacts millions of people every week, so I'll end my rant with a question. What are the possibilities, the hope that this will ultimately become a regional and a statewide issue, and that MnDOT and the funding will become available, and this will really rise to the level of importance that it really has in the Twin Cities?
I think that's a great point, and I do think that Bloomington Chamber, Bloomington legislators, the city of Bloomington have absolutely taken the lead. I think when we kind of undertook this advocacy push a couple of years ago, a big thing, outside of this room when we talk about this project, we very much emphasize the regional piece of it, and I think even though those entities have taken the lead, the Bloomington Chamber took the lead in getting all the beer chambers to pass resolutions, so
Bloomington, Edina, Eden Prairie, and Richfield.
yeah, so each of those chambers all passed resolutions. Part of that was to show that it is a regional project and it's not a Bloomington project. The chair of the 494 Corridor Commission is a city council member from Eden Prairie, and he's been very much the face of this project at the legislature, and that was on purpose. To show that it's in Bloomington, but it's not just a Bloomington project, and all those businesses in Eden Prairie want this to get done as well and benefit greatly from it being done. And I think working with 494 Corridor Commission and the 5 cities that are part of that, which is Richfield, Edina, Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, and Bloomington, we've been able to really have that regional feel. The other group we've been working really closely with is the 35W Solutions Alliance, which is every city from Minneapolis down into Scott County, Elko New Market. And so when we did have a meeting with Commissioner Zelli last fall with mayors and city council members and county commissioners from all of the cities, including Minneapolis, all the way down into Scott County, Dakota County. Liz Workman from Dakota County is the chair of that group. And so we have been working very hard at the Capitol to show a face of that this is a regional project. And I would say in the last year when I go to meetings and people talk about transportation, non-Bloomington legislators hold this up. I've heard people from Plymouth say this has to get done. And so I think Bloomington has definitely taken the lead in all the entities that we've been talking about. And that was someone kind of had to take the lead and start working, but it has been a regional effort, and we are working hard to kind of have that message, and I think it is getting through, although it's been frustrating, and it is not a Bloomington project.
And thank you. And I forgot to mention elected official council member Tim Bussey. Thank you for pointing that out. As part of the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, our Bloomington Chamber, we are always focused on things that are of a true regional nature, in addition to being the voice of local business. And when you think about this interchange and the amounts of people that come through this, probably even from other states. And so this is something that we as a region, we're not competing with Rochester, Duluth, or even St. Paul. We are truly competing with Denver and Seattle and Charlotte and those kinds of things, and just putting us on the map here recently, having the Super Bowl for those 10 days, I think just really signifies how strong we are working as a region. More questions?
Just a comment more than a question, echoing on what Tim said. If you asked a question earlier about who goes downtown, it is faster to get in and out of downtown than it is to get to Eden Prairie.
Yes.
And I know you've heard this, but if you think about it, and you talked about evening rush hour, it starts at 10 o'clock in the morning. If I want to come east from Eden Prairie and try to get to my office here in Bloomington, it's going to take me half an hour. I can get downtown Minneapolis in 22 minutes, almost any time of the day. And that was the 62 and 35 interchange. When that was corrected, that solved all kinds of problems. Franklin Avenue, Lake Street, that's going to solve some problems, yes. But this is a much bigger issue than that. And I know you've heard this, but I think you need to hear it even more, that this is just horrific. The traffic problem trying to get primarily east from Eden Prairie into Bloomington.
I think Robert, question?
Thanks. I guess that wasn't a question, that was going. So I'm interested to know, you kind of mentioned transit and then we kind of veered away from it back to the interchange, but how is transit's included in this as the CTIB, the County Transit Board, has kind of basically dissolved and broken up, and counties are kind of taking on now more individual responsibility for transit, and that's kind of being pushed away almost from the legislature and coming more towards the counties. How's that going to change the conversation around transit, especially around funding?
Well, I can talk kind of over, like, maybe from a broad perspective. Obviously, with CTIB dissolving, then each of the individual counties are going to take over that portion that CTIB was going to fund on transit. So related to this area, obviously the orange line is the big piece, and then MinPass is not really transit, but it's similar. I mean, it's not exactly, new roads either, so that kind of maybe crosses between the two. So I think just from a metro-wide perspective, it's going to change things in that each county is going to focus on projects that they care about. And Hennepin County has had kind of a long list of priorities. Obviously, Southwest is not funded yet at the federal level, and I think Bottineau is kind of number 2 from the light rail standpoint. But there's several BRT lines that are in process. And I don't know if Karl, if you want to talk about any of those. And Jen is here, and she probably can talk about those too.
We'll just note that before CTIP disbanded, they had made a funding commitment for their portion of the orange line, and so that is funded through CTIP already. So that doesn't go away. But I think for future projects that are crossing county lines, there is kind of a question about how well coordinated they'll be.
I mean, I guess one thing that maybe I should mention that was another big win last session was getting the Mall of America Transit Station bonding money in the bonding bill. And so thank you to the legislators who helped do that. And that, as you may know, is the busiest transit station in the state. And there's lots of lines that end there and start there, and it's not an attractive station at all right now for a place that so many visitors that come to our state go. And I think that on that project too, we were able to make a case that it was not really it's not a City of Bloomington project, it's more of a statewide project. And CTIB did fund that project before they disbanded as well, so.
All right, and we have 3 more questions. We got one over here. We've got another elected official I forgot to mention. We've got a school board member. Dick is here, and then I know Representative Slocum has a question. Why don't you go first?
Real big question. I'm just curious, often if you're not paying attention, you don't know that these things are in process. Is there a history, have applications for money been made before and not gone through, or is this the first time that everyone is pursuing funding for the interchange?
This is the most recent one I'm aware of.
I don't think there's been actually a program that was large enough that this one could actually compete in. So this is the only kind of submittal program that we've had so far. We have a number of times tried to work it into MnDOT's program and to the overall regional programs, which we've not succeeded. That's kind of through the general regular funding sources, and looked for, talk to our congressional delegation to see if we could get some federal support, et cetera. But this is probably our most programmatic opportunity that we've seen.
Thank you. I'm just going to interject, I'm going to be the voice of reason, she says next to me here. The Debbie Downer. I think this is all fabulous and wonderful and great, and I think our chances are very good. Thank you. And I got it really, really close now, and I can hear the difference. But the reality is we don't have enough funding in transportation, period. You likely drove over a fracture-critical bridge on your way here. Seriously. I was on transportation when the 35W bridge went down, and that was enough for me. There is no appetite to increase funding for transportation. There is no at the Capitol at this time. In fact, hopefully you'll see an editorial in the paper from me, because the 2 chairs of the Transportation Committee, one in the Senate and one in the House, have turned back federal money delivered to their door for rail. They don't want it. Your vote matters. And right now there is no way there's going to be additional funding. And there's no way they're going to raise a gas tax or add a tax to auto parts or whatever. There's just no way. We need the funding, and when you are so anti-transit in your basic ideology that you turn away a nice big bag of federal money, something's radically wrong. Sorry.
No, thank you. In fact, I know we have one more question here, but I also, Michelle too, address how our local businesses can help. How can we get involved to make sure, this is probably something that Kate can talk to?
Thank you. So Commuter Services is the organization I am with, and we're the outreach program of the I94 Corridor Commission. And we provide free resources to employers and multi-tenant properties in our 5-member cities to encourage all sustainable commuting. So anything that isn't driving alone, it's carpooling, vanpooling, bus, rail, telework, walk, bike. So we work with many companies in our 5 cities, but we'd love to work with more, and especially small and medium companies. You don't have to do a lot. You just can send out an email or put up a display of bus schedules and other materials for carpooling and other modes. So we're happy to provide those free resources for you. And we do have an action sheet out on the table at the registration table. So if you're interested in just exploring what we can provide for you as a business, please fill out the sheet and we will contact you.
Well, first of all, let me start by saying thank you all for coming and making yourselves available for a Q&A. Ken, you led off the presentation with a conversation about the 35W bridge over the Minnesota River, and then you mentioned briefly 106th Street. My interest is in a timeline on the 106th Street bridge. We have a lot of kids that come to school at Oak Grove Middle that go underneath that 106th Street bridge. And right now it's not user-friendly in the winter. I wouldn't suggest that it's real user-friendly in the summer, but I know that issue's supposed to be addressed, and I'm curious to know if you can tell me when we might see the benefits of that action. Thank you.
So the scope of the 35W bridge over the river initially was just the bridge across the river. And we've been talking with MnDOT for some time about the need to rebuild the 106th Street bridges because we have this sight distance issue and this pedestrian access issue under it that is kind of a long-standing problem, which you noted. Happy to say that MnDOT has agreed to extend their project to include the 106th Street bridge. So their design build project, which they are currently in the process of picking a contractor and an engineering team to do that work, will include the reconstruction of that bridge. So those proposals will tell us exactly the timing of that, but I would anticipate that the bridge project itself, in the larger sense, including that, construction will begin late this fall. So likely the construction on the 106th Street bridge will probably be towards the fall of 2019, roughly speaking. So MnDOT will rebuild those bridges, which will give us the sight distance and the clearance needed to have a good crossing. And then right attached to that, the city will have a project that will rebuild that segment of 106th Street to provide better trails and crossings, et cetera.
Michelle?
So I have a question. If you got that first stage of funding, and this is probably putting the cart before the horse, but I'm curious in terms of if you got that first stage of funding and it's the northbound, putting a flyover to go 494 west, will traffic just be halted in some portion of 35W, or are you going to be able to do the project so there's like one lane open to continue going north, or have you thought about that at all? I mean, or will a portion of 35W and 494 just be totally shut down?
Again, the design that's been done to date is kind of a conceptual plan, but I think as part of the preparation of this, there was some consideration done to how you would construct it. And so I think it's anticipated that they would try to maintain the existing capacity of 35W and 494 during construction. That said, clearly there would be disruptions most likely periodically. It wouldn't be a shutdown all the time, but there may be segments of construction that, you know, for a month at a time that would be restricted. Again, the details of that would be known when the more design work is completed.
All right. Well, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you again to Messerli and Kramer for sponsoring us here today. Thank you to all of you for your active participation. This is a conversation, and I appreciate you all being here.